starting a little bit early today just to make sure everything is working properly. YouTube's been giving us some fits recently, so hopefully everything is going to work. If you all can hear me, please let me know in the comment section, in the chat. If you're on Twitch, let me know. If you're on Twitter, let me know. Facebook, YouTube, wherever, let me know you're here. And we'll get started in just a minute. Today, we're going to be talking about c-betting and live cash games. I'm out at the World Series of Poker, and I got to play cash games one day. I had some friends in town, and I asked them what they wanted to do. And you know what they said? Play a cash game for a few hours. Fine. We went all around the city trying to find a casino that would give us a poker table to play at. We thought we were going to get one at the Wynn, but they said, nope. So then we got on the phone. Sahara gave us a poker table. We went over to Sahara. That place does not look great on the outside right now, but it's actually very, very nice on the inside. Shockingly nice. We played 1-3. What happened in that game? I know I got stacked on the last hand. We did a bomb pot on the last hand. A bomb pot, for those who do not know, is essentially everyone puts in some amount of money pre-flop, and you go straight to the flop. So you have to get really good at playing multi-way, right? Because if there's, I think there's 6 people at the table, hands like top pair go way down in value when there's 6 people at the table. Flop came, I had 9-4 of clubs. Flop came, I think it was 10-6-3. 3 clubs. I flopped the flush. I literally flopped the flush. Someone bet $40. I ripped it all in for my $200 stack. He instantly called. I'm like, oh no, he has it. He actually had queen 10 with the queen of clubs. He got a club on the river and I lost. But it's okay, right? You have to realize that whenever you do play cash games, you are going to experience variance. It happens. But in that scenario, we win, I don't know what, 35% of the time, something like that. I'm sorry, we win 65% of the time, he wins 35%. And that's good. You should be thrilled to get in that scenario. A lot of people get it in their minds that they're supposed to always win in their sessions, but hate to break it to you, especially if you're playing short sessions, like we only played 3 hours, you're only going to get to play 1 or 2 or 3 big hands, right? And whenever you play 1 or 2 or 3 big hands, sometimes you lose them, right? You get all in with a flush, and they make a bigger flush, you're going to lose. It's okay. Something a lot of newer poker players come to me with is like they can't handle the swings, right? But in reality, down 1 buy-in, it's not even a swing, right? You got to realize 2/3 of the time we're up a buy-in, plus whatever else was in the pot because it was a bomb pot, and then the other third of the time we're down a buy-in. And that's a good deal. If you can run that over and over and over again, you're going to make a ton of money. Bad beats don't matter. They really don't. You just have to put in a lot of volume. The thing is a lot of poker players get it in their heads that I'm playing a lot of poker because I play poker 2 days a week for 4 hours at a time. But like that's not a lot of poker at all, right? I mean, back when I used to play all day, every day, 5, 10, and 10, 20 at Bellagio, I would play 70 hours a week. I mean, literally 10 hours a day, every day. Noon till midnight, I would play 7 days a week. You may say, wow, that's a lot of poker. Yeah, it was. But at the same time, I really wanted to make a lot of money at that time. And I was making something like $100 an hour. And what's that? 280 hours per month. Comes out to $28,000 a month, roughly. And, that's a good salary for most people. So you got to realize that you can make good money if you go and you put in volume. But you're going to experience some variance. Back when I played 5-10, I would usually quit for the day if I got down 3 buy-ins, which they had $1,500 buy-ins. That was $4,500. So if I got down $4,500, I would quit, which is why I was only playing 70 hours a week instead of 84 hours a week, right? Because I would not play the full 12 hours every day, most days though. But like 450 big blinds is not that big of a swing, and it probably happened 1 or 2 days a week. I'd get stacked 3 times in a row, without actually making up any of it. And that's just part of the game, especially if you are playing a relatively high variance strategy. So anyway, you're going to have swings. You got to realize if you're not putting in a lot of volume, the variance of the game will feel worse to you because if, like, let's say you play Saturday and Sunday night, let's say, because you're working every other day, right? If you take a bad beat on Saturday and get stacked, and you take a bad beat on Sunday and get stacked, you have to think about that. That's going to be your most recent poker session in your mind for the next week, and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm running so bad. But in reality, you're not even playing a lot, right? What was my ratio to winning days and losing days? I would usually win something like 55-ish% of the time. And I was putting in like long sessions, right? But my wins were usually $6,000, $7,000 on a day. My losses were usually $3,000 or $4,000 on a day, right? So my wins were twice as big as my losses to some extent, give or take. Let's see. What's the amount of time you would recommend for a cash game session? You found that you can maintain 3 to 5 hours, but then you start to lose your mind. Yeah, so you have to figure out what works for you. I personally never really had tilt issues, let's say. So that was not really a problem for me, but if you do have tilt issues, I mean, obviously you want to try to get rid of those, but at the same time, you play as long as you possibly can in reality. And to be fair, I didn't even play... I didn't necessarily even play... What was I trying to say? Losing my mind. I forgot my point. I'm reading the comments over here. So yeah, what was I saying? Anyway, if you have tilt issues, you need to get those under control. When I was playing 5-10, I was well bankrolled for that game already, and the swings like really didn't bother me that much, right? Like at all, really. I mean, it was a pretty reasonable upward grind. I think my biggest downswing was something like 30K, give or take, and that's not even that bad, right? But the games were soft, and I probably had a reasonable edge in the games. And so I would recommend you find a game that you have a reasonable edge in and play that. You got bullied off the table because you sat down shallow stacked? I'm not sure what you mean by bullied off the table. They made fun of you for buying in with 100 big blinds? That doesn't make sense. You're saying that they have $500, so they were like raising and re-raising every hand? If that's the case, then just play good cards. Play better cards than your opponents. But yeah, what's the ideal session length? Okay, so yeah, I remember where I was going with that. I would play noon till midnight, which is not the ideal times for poker, but they were the ideal times for my life, because I didn't want to be out all night. I would definitely recommend perhaps playing in the more ideal hours. For example, you may find that the ideal time to play at your casino is like 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. Very likely could be ideal compared to noon to midnight till or noon till midnight. So you want to find the hours that make the most sense for you, and then do that. But if the game's good, you should play as much as you can, right? If you have an edge, every hour, every hand you're dealt, you make some amount of money. So you want to be dealt as many hands as possible. You want to play kind of quickly. You don't want to be playing slowly. Ideally, you want to play games where there's like a shuffle machine, for example, because you get more hands per hour, et cetera, et cetera. You never thought it might be a tilt issue. Yeah, I mean, look, if you can't play all that long before you start getting antsy or angry or tilted or whatever's happening, that's a problem, right? All right. Looks like everyone is trickling in. Hope you're all having a great day. Today, we're going to be discussing continuation betting in live cash games. Okay? This comes straight from my brand new cash game masterclass. We'll talk about that later. But let's get to it. First things first, what is a continuation bet? Continuation bet is a post-flop bet made by the raiser, the pre-flop raiser, on the previous betting round. So, you raise before the flop, someone calls, on the flop, you are betting. Or if they're out of position, they check, and then you bet. This is not when they check to you. When they check to you, then you're no longer continuation betting if you are not the pre-flop raiser, right? So this is only if you're the pre-flop raiser. We discuss many, many other parts of this in the cash game masterclass, like where you're the big blind caller or the button caller, right? And your opponent bets or they check to you, right? You need to know how to play all of these scenarios. But we are discussing specifically when you are going to make a continuation bet. So, how do you know when to continuation bet? And how do you know how much to continuation bet? And it's really important to make sure you focus on this particular spot of the game tree because this comes up a lot, right? Very often, you're going to raise, someone's going to call, on the flop, they're going to check to you, and you have to figure out what to do. If you consistently play this spot poorly, it's going to result in you spewing all sorts of money all over the place, which is why we're discussing it today because I think it's very, very important for you to know how to continuation bet well. So, first, well, today only, we're going to be discussing how to play 100 big blinds deep when the stack-to-pot ratio is roughly 15. Stack-to-pot ratio is how much money is in the stack compared to how much money is in the pot. As you get deeper stacked, your strategies will change, and as you get shallower stacked, your strategies will change, okay? We're discussing specifically this 15-ish stack-to-pot ratio scenario because normally, let's say you're playing 100 big blinds deep, you raise to 3 big blinds, someone calls, pot's 6 or 7 big blinds, and you have 97 left, which is about a 15 stack-to-pot ratio. All right. Two main factors are going to determine well, there are two main factors to your continuation bet, your frequency and your size, okay? And while these things are both determined by various factors, there are a few main factors that typically drive how often you bet and other factors that drive the size that you bet. We have a 1 and a 1 here. Should be 1 and a 2. Whatever. Frequency is determined by the type, the various hand types. We're going to go through this. Also, who has the range advantage and whether or not you're in position. The size is determined by who has the nut advantage, the range connectivity of your opponent, and the stack depth. So these 6 things are generally going to drive frequency and size. So we'll discuss frequency first. The hand types are essentially based on how you would categorize every hand that could possibly be in your range. Okay? So in all scenarios, you're going to have either a premium hand, a draw, a marginal made hand, or a junk. We discussed this thoroughly, how to categorize this in the poker coaching homework section. I discussed it thoroughly in this cash game masterclass that, maybe you'll check out later. Okay, next. Who has the range advantage? The range advantage is essentially the advantage that one player's entire range has over the opponent's entire range on a given board. Okay? And on most boards, the preflop raiser has a range advantage because they have all of the best hands in their range, whereas the preflop caller does not have all the best hands because they would have re-raised them, right? Preflop caller would re-raise aces, kings, queens, ace, king most of the time, right? Whereas the preflop raiser still has all of those in their range. Therefore, the preflop raiser usually has the advantage. So, betting frequency is essentially determined by the degree of that advantage. If the range advantage is small, you're typically going to be betting less often. And if the range advantage is big, you're typically going to be betting more often. Take a look at an example. You can use a program called Equalab, free program you can download, that will tell you your range advantage over your opponent. The solvers can do this as well, but if you want to do it free on your own, you can use a program like Equalab. So, let's take a scenario where someone raises, let's say early position raises with this range here on the top, and then big blind calls with this range on the bottom. Notice big blind's range does not contain aces, kings, and queens because they 3-bet those, right? So, on a board like ace 7-6, the initial raiser has a big range advantage. This means we're going to be betting frequently on ace 7-6 because 58% is generally a pretty large amount. Okay? What about on 7-6-5? Well, now you see, same ranges, but now the big blind has the advantage because they have a whole lot of low-suited connected hands, whereas the preflop raiser does not have so many low-suited connected hands, right? So on these low boards, you're going to find that you have to do a whole lot of checking because as your range advantage decreases or becomes like less than 50%, you start checking a ton, okay? Something I did, we'll call it wrong, a long time ago, and I played cash games all day, every day, is that I would just raise and continuation bet a ton. Not 100%, but maybe like 80%. And to be fair, that could have been the right play against those opponents in that game. But from a GTO point of view, a game theory optimal point of view, you cannot go around continuation betting every single time because now people have learned how to play poker a little bit better and they know they need to defend decently wide, right? So you want to make sure that you are continuation betting reasonably as long as your opponents play somewhat well. Okay? All right. So when we have more than 60% equity, this is a strong range advantage. Okay? When you have a strong range advantage, you are going to be betting basically every time. Between 54% and 60% is a moderate advantage. You're going to be betting somewhat often. And then if you have something like 54% range advantage or less, you're usually going to be betting pretty infrequently. Okay? All right. Now, once we know we're going to be betting once we know like roughly what a strong advantage is, now we need to figure out which hands to be betting, right? So when you have a strong advantage, 60% or more, you're going to bet with nearly everything. You're going to be betting with your premium hands, your draws, your marginal hands, and your junk. You're betting your entire range. When you have a moderate advantage, you're going to be betting pretty often, usually with your premium hands and your draws, and then also with a few extra bluffs. Quite often you're going to be betting like slightly wider for value as well. So you have a few extra bluffs, usually lowish equity bluffs that are usually added in. Then when you have a weak range advantage, you're going to be betting not that often at all, usually with just your premium hands and your draws, okay? So, position also impacts this. Typically, as you are in position, you're going to be betting more often, and when you're out of position, you have to be doing more checking. I'm skipping through a bunch of slides here because otherwise we're not going to get to the examples. How close is this to tournament strategy? Well, John, the tournament strategy that we've outlined at pokercoaching.com in the tournament masterclass is designed for 40 big blind play and 20 big blind play. I realize, though, that sometimes you are deeper, and the play would be relatively similar, except for this cash game masterclass I made goes through mostly 100 big blind and 200 big blind simulations. So it's very different spots because usually you play cash games deeper stacked. Okay? Bet sizing is primarily determined by your nut advantage. Essentially, who has more nut hands in their range? Okay? For example, let's say under the gun raises and the big blind calls. On ace, king, jack, who has more premium hands, if these are the ranges we are looking at? Well, very clearly, on ace, king, jack, under the gun has all the nuts, right? Big blind lacks a lot of the nuts. So on ace, king, jack, under the gun has a big range advantage. What about on jack 6-6? On jack 6-6, notice under the gun has almost no sixes, whereas the big blind has a whole bunch of sixes, so they have a nut advantage in that scenario. Typically, when you have the nut advantage, you get to bet bigger. When you do not have the nut advantage, you bet really, really small. Okay? Also, there's this idea of range connectivity. How well does the opponent's continuing range connect with the board? The range that they, to some extent, should continue with. On a board like ace, king, jack, for example, if they're sitting there with a hand like an ace or a king, they're just not folding, right? And typically in those spots, you want to be betting very big. As the opponent has very clearly obvious hands, you'll typically find you want to bet on the bigger side. On more uncoordinated boards, though, you typically want to be betting on the smaller side because the opponent should be continuing with stuff like king high, which is not such a great hand. And then stack depth. Typically, as you are deeper, you want to be betting larger. Simple as that. When you're shallow stacked, you usually go small. This is why you see a lot of players in tournaments betting one big blind. For example, say you raise, big blind calls in a tournament, 40 big blinds deep, becomes jack 6-6. They check in the big blind, it's on you. You should be betting here frequently, but very small, like one big blind in a tournament when you're playing 20, 30, 40 big blinds deep. Whereas in a cash game, you'll bet a little bit bigger than one big blind. So we have this bet frequency and size flowchart. I'll walk you through this really quick. Essentially, your frequency is determined by if you're in position or out of position. In position, hands with a strong range advantage, usually going to be betting very frequently, 80% of the time or more. These are boards where the preflop raiser usually has a pretty big advantage. If you have a moderate range advantage, you're usually going to be betting not quite as often, but still pretty frequently. These are boards where you have a moderate advantage. And then boards where you have a weak advantage or no advantage, such as like 9-7-5, that are really good for the big blind caller or maybe even the button caller. You're going to be doing a whole lot, well, I guess button caller's over here, but for the big blind caller, you're going to be doing a lot of checking typically. It is worth noting, say you raise in the small blind calls. Small blind's range may actually not contain a lot of low-suited connected stuff. So a board like 6-5-4 may be really bad for the preflop raiser against the big blind, but maybe not against the small blind depending on their strategy. If you're out of position, you're usually going to be doing a whole lot more checking. There are very few boards where the initial raiser has a big advantage over, let's say, a button caller. Because the button caller usually does not have a whole lot of garbage, whereas a big blind caller does have a lot of garbage, right? The one exception to this is king high boards. If you're playing a good, strong GTO range, preflop, king high boards are especially good for the preflop raiser, and these are boards that you can still continuation bet very frequently. Every other board, though, is not great for the initial raiser if you're out of position. So you're going to have to do some checking on these boards. Like ace-jack-5. You may think ace-jack-5 is great for the preflop raiser, and it is good, but it's not a board you can continuation bet 100% because the preflop caller has a whole lot of ace-x suiteds in their range that connect very well with this, right? Then on boards we have a weak advantage, 10 high, 8 high, low card boards in general, you need to do a lot of checking because very often you don't have an advantage on those boards. Okay, so fine. Now that we've decided if we're going to bet, right? Next, we have to ask, what size do we bet? So, do we have the nut advantage? If we do not, you're usually going to want to bet small, something like a third pot or less. If you have way fewer nut hands in your opponent, in your range than your opponent does, you typically want to bet small. Because the way it works is, even though you may have more equity than your opponent in this scenario, with your whole range, they have more hands in their range that just really crush your hands. Like on Jack 6-6, right? On Jack 6-6, aces, kings, and queens, ace, jack are all really, really good, but they still lose to a 6. So that's the spot where you typically want to be betting small in those scenarios. Next, do you have the nut advantage? If you do, you want to ask, how well does the opponent's range connect with the board? If it connects very well, like on ace, king, jack, you usually want to be betting big. If it does not connect well at all, you usually want to be betting on the smaller side, such as on, well, maybe not Jack 6-6, but think about Jack 6-2, right? That's a board where they're not going to have a whole lot of obviously good hands. I think you're going to be betting on the smaller side in general, but it depends exactly on how the ranges interact. Sizing is a relatively tough part of this. I think, at least in my experience, the frequency is usually pretty easy, but there are a lot of weird corner cases where sizing is all over the place. All right, let's take a look at some examples. See you all talking a lot in the chat. How much did you miss? We started about 20 minutes ago. You see this flowchart is slightly different than the Tournament Masterclass one. It is. Everything's fully updated. We made the Tournament Masterclass about a year ago, I think. 2 years ago? Something like that. I think a year ago. This is updated. You know, we're always improving our tools, making things a little bit better, tightening things up a bit. If we are out of position with no range advantage, do we still bet polarized, or do we need the nut advantage all the time? What is this question asking? If you are out of position with no range advantage, you check a lot. Simple as that. When you're deep stacked, you have to check a lot. Okay? I'll show you an example of this in a minute. Okay. Let's say you raise a low jack and the big blind calls. Flop comes ace jack 5. All right? Pretty good flop for the initial raise, for the initial pre-flop raiser. Big blind checks. All right, you want to use the range analyzer in the tools section of pokercoaching.com to figure out and categorize your hands, okay? So you may say, all right, let's do it. What do we mean by categorize our hands? Well, we have to figure out if our hand is a premium made hand, a draw, a marginal made hand, or junk. Okay, what is a premium hand on ace jack 5? Probably something like ace 10 and better. And when I say a premium hand, I mean a hand that can reasonably bet the flop, bet the turn, and bet the river, and be happy about it, right? Can you really bet the flop and the turn and the river with a hand like ace 3, top pair, no kicker, and expect to get called by worse? Probably not, right? So a premium hand are hands that you are betting, and you're not really planning on folding them if you get raised, okay? Notice if you bet ace 3 on ace jack 5 and get raised, it's not a good spot, right? So this is the first step, is to go through and roughly categorize the hands like this. Next, what are our draws on ace jack 5? 2 spades. Well, we have some spade draws, and we have some gut shots, right? No other draws, really, right? What are our marginal hands? These are hands that can usually put 1 or 2 bets in, but do not want to bet the flop and the turn and the river. These are going to be our weaker aces, pocket pairs, jacks, and 5s, right? So we have a lot of marginal made hands. And what is junk on this board? Our junk, you can't see it. It's not clearly listed, but it is the king X without a flush draw. Okay, these are garbage hands. We're gonna let it go check, check, and then fold on the turn if we don't get anything. Okay, so when you go through and roughly categorize your range like this, you will start to see that the ratio of premium hands to draws is very important. These two things interact very, very closely together. On the flop, at most, you can have 2 draws to every 1 premium made hand. Okay. At most. Obviously here we have fewer draws than premium made hands, so that's fine. And our marginal range and our junk range are also very connected, because you want to make sure that when you check it back a few times, when you check it back on the flop, you want to make sure you're not just going to drastically overfold if your opponent bets. Okay? So this is a scenario where you want to be checking with a ratio of something like 70% marginal made hands to 30% junk. Less junk is also fine, because that means you just have easier calls on the turn, right? Okay, so notice in this scenario, we have an extreme lack of draws and junk, right? Remember how I said you can have at most 2 draws to 1 premium made hand and 70-30 ratio. So we're actually lacking draws and junk in this scenario. And you may say, why does that matter? Well, this is going to usually indicate a very clear range advantage, okay? Interestingly enough, though, in this scenario, GTO strategy is to do a decent amount of betting, but you actually do want to do some checking in this scenario. And that's because a lot of your top pair type hands, like ace 3, for example, like I mentioned, are not happy enough to bet and get all the money in by the river, right? They're good, but they're also not all that vulnerable to being outdrawn. So whenever your top pair is an ace, you're just not going to get outdrawn all that often, so you don't really mind letting it go check. Also, there are a lot of hands in our range that are pretty good that do not necessarily want to get a lot of money in the pot. Like if you bet a hand like pocket tens on the flop and get called, it's not great at all, right? But if it checks down, you win a lot. This is one of the, like I mentioned, one of the corner cases where you're not continuation betting 100% despite a big range advantage. That's because a lot of the hands in your range just don't need all that much protection. And also, your opponent probably doesn't have anything that's all that great in this scenario, right? The opponent's range is going to be a whole lot of just total nonsense. And if your opponent has a whole lot of total nonsense, you don't really care if they stick around in the pot. As the opponent's range has more and more equity against you, not necessarily equity, but the ability to outdraw you, you should be more inclined to bet. But here we're just not all that likely to get outdrawn with very many hands in our range at all. It is worth noting a hand like pocket sixes bets more often than a hand like pocket tens, right? Because notice sixes can get outdrawn very easily, whereas tens, not so much, right? Same thing with kings. Kings almost never bets, okay? Definitely a tough spot, though. Notice we're using a small bet in this scenario because it's just generally kind of hard for the opponent to have anything amazing in this spot. Obviously, if they have an ace, they're not folding, but it's a spot where you want to be betting small. Let's take a look at very similar scenario, but a different scenario when you raise from the button and the big blind calls, okay? In this scenario, now we have less equity in general with our range because notice our range is starting a whole lot wider, right? So I can already tell you, notice that our ratios, we have a lot of draws and a lot of junk, right? So now that's already very clear to me that we do not have a gigantic range advantage in this spot because we have so much nonsense in our range as well. We're still going to have the advantage, but it's not going to be as big of an advantage, right? And typically, in scenarios like this, now we're going to be betting with probably roughly the same frequency, if I had to guess, probably about half the time again. But now we're going to be betting with a bigger size. As we have more draws in our range to some extent, we usually want to be betting on with a bigger size compared to a scenario like this where we have a lot of premium hands. We just don't mind making the pot a little bit bigger in this spot. We just want to nudge the pot up with all of our good hands because all these hands are in great shape. Whereas in this scenario, notice we have a lot of draws, and with all of these draws, we're going to want to pick up the pot some portion of the time, right? You may say, what are the draws in this scenario? We already talked about gut shots and flush draws, but now we have a whole lot more potential draws, like backdoor flush draws, right? We have flush draws and backdoor flush draws betting. We're using some bottom pairs as bluffs in this scenario because they're way more likely to get outdrawn in the spot, right? Also, small pairs, I think, can be used as bluffs some portion of the time. Remember, we're just trying to make sure we don't go over roughly 32% draws. We can have at most 32% draws. We could probably take some of the junk and bluff it as well if we felt inclined. That would make this number closer to 70-30, the ratio of marginal to junk. Look at the junk that we're checking, though. Not a lot of good junk here. So the junk we would be betting would be stuff like King 8, and King 8's not a particularly good bluff on Ace, Jack 5 with no backdoor draws. So I think this looks nice. This is fine. Then you always want to compare it to the GTO strategy. Make sure you're using roughly the same frequencies, right? So notice we are betting 45-ish % of the time. GTO bets 50% of the time, so it lines up nicely. And ideally, you want to make sure that the hands that you are betting line up with roughly the hands that GTO is betting. We're betting the hands in red and blue, right? And you see GTO's betting all the best top pairs, a bunch of draws, a bunch of gut shots, right? Notice GTO uses various hands down here to bluff. These have backdoor draws to the straights, right? King 4, King 3, and King 2 all have backdoor straight draws on top of backdoor flush draws. So these are going to be bet very frequently compared to a hand like King 6 that has fewer backdoor flush draws, or has fewer backdoor straight draws, right? So you'd rather bet a hand like King 3 as a draw than a hand like King 6. Obviously, the flush draw can still bet sometimes, but that all makes sense. Let's see. If you have not studied this, is there a good way to determine which hands get to bet as draws? Typically, you bet lots of your high equity draws. So that's going to be stuff like flush draws, right? And you're also going to be betting a lot of stuff like gut shots. Essentially, you want your draws to be hands that can either call a raise because they're so good, like a king eye flush draw, or hands that are pretty junky and can fold to a raise, like 9-8 of hearts, right? Like right here we see 9-8 and 8-7 betting about 50% of the time. These are 9-8 of spades and hearts that are betting. So notice you're betting 9-8 of spades, not planning to fold. You're betting 9-8 of hearts, planning to fold if they raise you. But for the most part, you're going to find that if you just load up your logical draws, it's probably going to be okay. Let's take a look at a scenario from out of position now. Okay? So now we raise low jack and the button calls. Same scenario, ace jack 5. Now our range advantage decreases a lot. Okay? So you want to make sure that you are checking with some premium hands. I know I don't have it necessarily listed here, but this is a spot where you probably are going to want to slow play hands like pocket aces, right? Pocket aces would be a great hand to check here some portion of the time. Whenever you're out of position, you're going to see that GTO uses very mixed strategies across the board in general, because you want to make sure you're difficult to play against. But if you wanted to make an implementable strategy, it would look something like this, which is actually kind of similar to when you were the initial raiser and the big blind calls. And we see here, this is what we're doing. Mostly betting small, just nudging up the pot with our equity advantage. Notice we are slow playing aces, ace, jack, right? Where we are checking a lot of good hands, and we are going to put check raises in this scenario. To clarify, are we betting bigger on the button? Yes, we're betting bigger on the button in this scenario. Mainly because we have a lot of draws that don't mind picking up the pot immediately. Compared to this scenario, we don't have nearly as many draws, right? Aren't backdoor straight and flush draws like 1%? No. All right, let's take a look at another spot. Let's take a look at, what should we do? What should we do? Let's take a look at the spot where we don't have the advantage. Okay, let's look at a pretty bad spot. Here we go. Let's take a look at this scenario. Low jack versus big blind on 9-7-5. Okay? On 9-7-5, this board highly favors the big blind, right? So when this board highly favors the big blind, what are we going to do? Well, we have to do a lot of checking because we have almost no range advantage. So what hands do we want to bet in this scenario? Typically, you're going to want to bet with your best top pairs because those are very likely good, but also vulnerable to being outdrawn, right? Like ace-9, king-9, etc. You want to bet your sets usually. Notice we don't really have stuff like 9-8 here, but if we did, we'd probably bet 9-8. You're going to find that pairs and straight draws usually can bet because they can happily call a raise, right? Where something like 10-9 has to be a little bit more cautious because you cannot bet and happily call a raise. Then we just have to find some draws. Notice we don't actually have a lot of draws here. We have king-6 and king-8 for gut shots. We have ace-6 and ace-8 if we wanted to bet them, but notice we don't actually have all that many good hands to bet in general, and the ones we're betting aren't even like super nuts. I mean, obviously the sets are good, but these are not super nuts. So you have to be a little bit careful betting with too many draws here. Also, ace-high can usually check back and then call. You're going to find that GTO strategy often plays your draws aggressively sometimes and passively sometimes. And an easy way to logically split it up your range when you know this is what your range look like is bet the draws with lower showdown value. So like king-8 has less showdown value than ace-8, right? They're both gut shots, but ace-8 wins sometimes when it checks down. King-8 wins less often when it checks down. So king-8's probably going to be more inclined to bet than ace-8, but again, GTO strategy is going to be super mixed in these scenarios. Then we have these backdoor flush draws, backdoor straight draws with overcards. I think those make a lot of sense to bet that are queen high or jack high. They probably can't win if they check it down, right? You may say, why not bet aces? Aren't aces vulnerable? The issue here is that if we start betting hands like aces, kings, queens, and jacks, what does that do to our checking range? Take a second to think about it, right? What happens to our checking range if we start betting aces, kings, queens, and jacks? Well, it gets pretty bad, right? If we bet aces, kings, queens, and jacks, then look what else we're checking. We're checking ace-7. That's like our best hand. Maybe pocket ace. That's our best hand. We have a whole lot of ace-high there then in that scenario that cannot really call a turn bet all that easily, right? I mean, like ace-king's not junk, but it's certainly not good. And you're going to end up with a range that's just far too weak. I want to thank all of you for coming into the show today. Hope you're all having fun. This feels like a little coffee. Are we done with that? No, we still do a little brain fuel. I do not do it when I'm traveling. I've been traveling a lot over the last few months. I think I'm going to go home for a while. Traveling a lot's rough, especially when you have a wife and kids at home, you know? It's always very, very nice to be home. So I'll be home for a little while after this. Dr. Samber, or D. Samber, really wants to discuss the fact that backdoor draws don't come in all that often. You have to realize the fact that they don't come in all that often is not what's actually relevant. What's relevant is that they give you additional equity you can keep betting on the turn with. Whenever you bet with a backdoor flush draw and you turn a flush draw, that's a hand you can very easily keep betting because it has very good equity, right? And as you have more hands in your range that let you keep betting, you get to polarize your range, which on average will result in you winning the pot. If you perfectly polarize your range, you win whatever's in the pot on the river, right? And having additional hands you can just keep betting as part of a polarized range is very, very important. So you're going to find that when you're looking for extra draws, the extra draws, on top of obvious draws like straight draws and flush draws, are usually gut shot straight draws, backdoor flush draws, backdoor straight draws, and overcards. Like right here is a good example, right? Notice Queen Jack of spades, hearts, and diamonds on 9-7-5. That's a hand we can very, very easily bet and then fold if we get raised, right? No problem. You have no idea where the low jack sits. You never heard of that. LOL. Well, okay. Maybe you're new. Check out pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. We go through this. The low jack is under the gun six-handed. So if there were 6 people at the table, low jack is under the gun six-handed. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look at what GTO strategy does here. It almost never bets. It bets tiny a third of the time. Now, you may say, why are we betting tiny here? This is something that actually starts to change compared to shallower stacked play, where I think you may go for a bigger bet when you bet the spot because you're just happier getting it in with something like ace-9. When you are playing deep stacked and you have a severe lack of the nut advantage, right, as we do here, we lack the nut advantage and we lack the range advantage. In the spot, we do not get to bet big. We want to just nudge up the pot a little bit with some of our best hands and some draws. And notice here, we only have 49% equities. This is not a good spot. This is not a good spot at all, right? So you see, the hands that we are betting, sets mostly bet. Although, again, they mix it with some checking sometimes. Ace-9 and King-9 do some betting. 10s and Jacks do some betting. Various backdoor straight draws with overcards do some betting. Ace-8, King-8, Ace-6, King-6 do some betting. But you see, we're checking in this scenario almost every time. And this is something a lot of people don't do. They bet almost every time. And that's a mistake. That's a big problem. You cannot get away with betting every time on 9-7-5 against good players. So you develop a strong checking back range to help protect stuff like ace highs, right? Because if you can check it down with ace high, you're actually pretty happy. But the way you get to actually get to the showdown is making sure you have aces, kings, queens, jacks, etc. in your range so your opponent cannot just blast you, right? Don't build the pot without a nut advantage? Yeah, to some extent. All right, let's take a look at another spot. Now we're going to be in the button versus the big blind on 9-7-5. Now, go through and categorize the range. And in this scenario, now we have a whole lot more really good hands, right? We have a lot of straights, 2 pairs, sets, etc., right? So that's going to allow us to bet a little bit more confidently because now on 9-7-5, we have okay equity still. It's not like a great scenario for us, but in this spot, we have more nuts in our range, right? As you can more confidently call a raise, that's going to usually allow you to bet on the bigger side. So right here, when we bet all these hands in red, a lot of these can very easily call a raise, right? So that's going to let us bet slightly wider for value. Also, we have way more marginal made hands that can check it back to protect the ace-high checks, right? Like notice we have a lot of 9s that we can check. We also have a lot of 7s that can check. And these are hands that can easily check, flop, call a turn bet, call a river bet, right? What happens in this range here is that if we bet all of the overpairs, is that our check back range is just very few 7s, right? And if we have very few 7s, very few 5s, no 9s, now our checking range is very, very weak, right? So you want to make sure your checking range can reasonably stick around against a turn and river bet some portion of the time. All of our hands in red are like really good. I know we're calling hands like 8-7 and 6-5 a premium made hand, although they're kind of like draws to some extent, but whatever, rough categorization works. You're betting it and you're not folding it if you get raised. How about that? And then we need to find a lot of bluffs. So load them up. Lots of 6s, lots of 8s. Overcards with backdoor draws, overcards without backdoor draws. Ace X, King X, Queen X, backdoor draws. That gets us up to that 2-to-1 ratio. This is about as many bluffs as we could possibly have. Maybe we're supposed to tone it down a little bit. Maybe. The problem, though, is that every hand we don't bet as a draw essentially gets added to our junk range, right? So are any of the hands in blue hands that we want to just, like, check it down? Maybe ace-6, ace-4, ace-3, ace-2. I could see checking those back, right? That would make some sense. Not a whole lot of other ones I want to check back, right? You don't really want to check a hand like king-queen, because when you check king-queen, you just lose at the showdown a lot, right? Maybe ace-10's a hand we could check back. Again, I'm just trying to really load up the draws in this scenario because our range that we're betting in red is really, really strong. So I want to have as many draws as I possibly can. Usually 2-to-1 is the ratio you can have. Here it's 40-to-20. Nice 2-to-1 ratio. And we're going to be betting big here. I can already tell you we're going to be betting big because now we don't lack the nut advantage, right? So as we see, GTO strategy here checks 35%. I was checking 40. So GTO is actually even betting a little bit more than I was. Which, sure, fine. As long as you're somewhere in that vicinity, it's good. 2 bluffs to 1 premium made hand. Yeah, 2 bluffs to 1 premium made hand is the most you can have on the flop for the most part, as a general rule, if you're categorizing your hands as I have. It changes on the turn in the river, though. It's a 1-to-1 ratio on the turn, and if you're potting it on the river, it's 2 premium hands to every 1 bluff on the river. But we're not talking about that today. If you want to study that, you can check out my Cash Game Masterclass. So take a look at what's betting, right? 9s are all betting. All these hands in this region are betting. Makes sense, right? Lots of 8s are betting. Lots of 6s are betting. Lots of overcards are betting, like I said, right? Again, King Jack. Is King Jack really a draw? Yeah, it's not good, and it has 6 outs, right? That's a draw. So King Jack's betting as a draw. Notice we have some of these hands down here that are betting with backdoor flush draws some portion of the time. Not always, but some portion of the time. Makes sense, right? Lots of good ace highs checking. Lots of 7s checking. Lots of 5s checking, right? If we're playing against players at 1-2, should we be betting more linearly? Not without good reason. I mean, the reason you want to be betting with fewer bluffs and more made hands is because you think your opponent's going to call you a lot, right? And also you think your opponent's not going to bet the turn when it goes check, check, right? Like if we knew we could just check it down with our ace high every time, then sure, we would much prefer that. If we could just check it down with a 5 every time, we'd much prefer that, right? But that's not really how poker works. When you let it go check, check with a very weak range, your opponent's going to bet sometimes, right? So if they're going to bet, you want to make sure that you have hands in your range that can continue against that bet when you let it go check, check. So there are certainly times to try to adjust to exploit what your opponent's doing wrong, but at the same time, I usually start trying to play at least reasonably close to GTO. Let's take a look at the spot from out of position. Low jack versus button. You raise low jack, button calls 9-7-5. Categorize your hands, right? Not a lot of good hands here, and our checking range is really, 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 really weak. So, in this scenario, what do? Well, I've done my studying. I know on 10 high boards and lower, out of position, 10 high boards and lower out of position, you should check basically everything. Is a general rule. You're going to find the GTO solver either bets like really infrequently, like 10 or 15% of the time, and it's always going to be with roughly these hands in red and blue, or it's going to check every time. 10 high boards and lower are a spot where you have to check a lot from out of position. And as we see here, GTO bets 14% of the time, right? So if you told me you wanted to bet, I would say sure with some tiny portion of hands. Again, the range is very, very mixed in this spot. But you see, you're basically never betting. When you raise, cut off, hijack, low jack, under the gun, whatever, and the button calls, and it comes 10 high boards and lower, you got to check basically everything. I'll show you another one. 7-4-3. How about 7-4-3? Low jack versus button. 100% checking, right? What about 10-8-6? 10-8-6, 100% checking, right? So this is a spot where it comes up all the time. You're checking, and you're looking to develop a strong check raising strategy. You will be check raising, by the way. We're not checking and check calling only. Okay? Go back and find my flow chart. So yeah, that's it. Let me answer some questions for you really quick, and then I'm going to tell you about what I've been spending the last year working on. Let's see. Next question's getting lost. If you're confused about something before, if you open from the low jack versus button on ace jack 5, you should bet the same frequency from both positions, but size up on the button. So first things first, don't really relate the two scenarios. The scenarios are all similar but different, very clearly different, and they're different puzzles that need to be solved. On ace jack 5, when you open from early position against the big blind, you have a whole lot of hands that are really strong and not vulnerable to being outdrawn. You also do not have a whole lot of bluffs, right? When you raise the button, you have way more hands that are vulnerable, and also you have way more bluffs. Typically, as you have more bluffs, you're usually betting on the bigger side, because like when you have queen high on ace jack 5, you don't really care if your opponent folds, right? All right, so again, here's the flow chart. Screenshot it, save it. If you're a Poker Coaching Premium member, you should have these flowcharts available for you somewhere. If you can't find them, send us an email, support@pokercoaching.com. So yeah, let's talk about what I've been working on recently. Well, first things first, it's the Black Friday sale. The Black Friday sale is happening now. Time to get in there and get a big discount on pokercoaching.com. We're going to tell you about everything we've been working on, including the gigantic new project that I'm launching today. It's available right now. It is the Cash Game Masterclass. It is humongous. It took a long time to make, but it was worth it. Essentially, this course teaches you everything you need to know to crush cash games. Simple as that. Everything I've learned by playing 2-5, 5-10, 10-20, 1-3 every once in a while is in this course, and we also go through how to play good, strong, fundamentally sound strategies, right? You want to explain how to adjust to the opponent, or you learn how to adjust to the opponents, but you also learn how to play fundamentally sound. Okay? Let's go through all of the videos. We have an introduction section. This is somewhat basic stuff. This is kind of similar to the fundamentals course. So just make sure you understand the absolute basics of poker, like equity and pot odds and ranges, putting those three together and making good use of them, counting combinations, and the idea of GTO compared to implementable strategies. Then we get right into the pre-flop section. We go through all sorts of concepts, and we cover literally all of the spots. All of the spots are covered. I know there are lots of various crash courses out there that cover some of the spots. They cover the common spots, but we cover essentially all of the spots. When they fold to you, when there's a raise, when you raise and when you get 3-bet, right? When you have good implied odds or when you don't have good implied odds. When you're facing limpers, when there's a pre-flop raise before you, when there's a raise and a call before you, when there's a raise and a 3-bet before you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We go through all of the spots and show from a GTO and implementable point of view how to respond in those scenarios. And then we discuss playing 200 big blinds deep and do it all over again because the strategies change as you get deeper stacked or shallower stacked. If you want shallower stacked content, check out the Tournament Masterclass, which is structured somewhat similarly. Then we discuss post-flop strategies. We go through all the spots, like we kind of just did here. We went through a few of the spots, but there's actually a whole lot of spots. I think the PowerPoint was, I don't even know, 1,500 slides long or something like that. It was gigantic. We discuss common mistakes people make, which is something that a lot of people do. We also discuss like how to play when they check to you, right? When the continuation bet. What do you do whenever they check raise you or when they raise you on the flop? How about whenever you're multi-way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then we go through a lot of spots on the turn. Very similar stuff. We follow through with a lot of the GTO simulations we do on the flop, and then take them to various turns. We learn how to play various turns. We discuss like which turns are good, which turns are bad. Let me see if I can find this for you real quick. Actually, I'm not going to be able to find it for you because it's 1,500 slides long. It's there. Trust me. It's good. Then we go through playing the river. We discuss how you should think differently about the river compared to the other betting rounds. Because on the river, you either have a value bet or a bluff, or a hand that's not good enough to value bet, right? And you have to figure out how to go about structuring your river ranges, which is very, very important. We also have a big section on other topics, because there are a lot of topics, discussing various format adjustments, like when there's a straddle, when there's a Mississippi straddle, when there's a bomb pot, whatever, right? We also discuss things like seat selection, game selection, the rake, how to minimize the rake, how to figure out if you're actually winning in your games, right? How to find good games. We discuss backing as the backer, as the backee. Generally don't recommend it. We discuss tells, mindset, and how to continue crushing the games. This course is big. It took a long time to make, a lot of effort, a lot of resources, and it's not for sale. You can only get it if you are a Poker Coaching Premium member. If you're a Poker Coaching Premium member right now, you can go to pokercoaching.com, and it's there, right at the top of the dashboard. It is for Poker Coaching Premium members only. If you don't play cash games, that's okay. We have a Tournament Masterclass. Very, very similarly structured to the cash game course, except for it's for tournament scenarios, and obviously it discusses things like payout implications and ICM and whatnot, right? Our members are crushing it. Here's Max Tave. I met Max at one of my breakfasts that I hosted at the World Series of Poker. If you were a Poker Coaching member, you got an email. You could come have breakfast. I think we had 35 people come 2 days in a row. So 70 Poker Coaching members came out, had breakfast with me. Max was one of them. And he gave me a box of macadamia nuts. They were great. I ate basically all of them over the last 2 weeks here in Vegas. So yeah, I ate a lot of macadamia nuts. Anyway, he took third place in the reunion, the first tournament out here, for $241,000. Oh my gosh, good job, good work. Also, at pokercoaching.com, there's a bunch of courses. For Black Friday, we're putting them all on sale. We have multiple courses going through all sorts of things, like my complete guide to single table tournaments, preparing one of my students, Blas Zerjau, for the World Series of Poker, me reviewing various deep runs, like when I won the bigger 109 a while back. We have courses on Heads Up, etc. We have content on tournaments, on cash games, on mindset, and they're all on sale for Black Friday. But why buy all the courses when you can just sign up for pokercoaching.com and get access to all of them? If you are a Poker Coaching Premium member, you have access to all these courses and the Tournament Masterclass and the Cash Game Masterclass. It's all included. Kind of like Netflix, right? When you sign up for Netflix, they don't charge you for every video you watch, right? They charge you a monthly fee and you can watch whatever you want. Literally everything. Also, we have over 1,400 interactive quizzes where I or one of my coaches put you in a spot and ask you how you would play that scenario. And then we give you our feedback on the decision you made, and then we move on to the next betting round, and we continue going through that. And if you play a lot of these, you'll start to see scenarios where maybe you mess up a lot on the river, maybe you mess up a lot on the flop, whatever. And that will go a long way to helping you find the various classes you need to be studying to make sure you're really understanding those spots well. Is there a paperback edition of the Cash Game Masterclass? The Cash Game Masterclass is a series of videos and quizzes. It is not a book. If you want a book, check out Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em. So far, I spent over $500,000 hiring my coaches. Here they all are. Lots and lots of world-class pros. We have Faraz, Jaka, WPT Player of the Year, I think. I was as well. James Romero, he may be one of the best poker players in the world right now. Absolute crusher. He's a genius. We have Bert Stevens. He was the #1 player in the world online earlier this year. Brad Wilson, excellent cash game player. The list goes on and on. Here you go. Read the list. Lots and lots of world-class pros. We recently brought on Ryan O'Donnell for Spin and Go content. That's been excellent. Jonathan Jaffe is one of my personal favorites. He gets in there and he exploits hard. I did a webinar with him just the other day, actually. It was a lot of fun. It was a really good one where we reviewed hands that we played together in the Poker Masters recently. He got a thin value bet in against me one time. Brutal. We're currently paying these coaches good money every month to make new interactive quizzes, new live webinars, new live streams for only the members. And, I'm happy to do it. Happy to be able to do it. So, for Black Friday, here's what we're offering you. You can get a 1, 2, or 3-year membership to pokercoaching.com. This is the standard membership where you get access to some of the content. As you can see, we're giving big discounts on that. You may not know this, but I've actually been coaching a small number of players called my Inner Circle for the last 5 years. 5 years. But we're closing down the Inner Circle at the end of the year. So I can focus on giving more attention to all of the Poker Coaching Premium members. That said, we recorded all of the sessions with the students' consent, of course, and we have all of those recordings available to you. There's over 240 hours of essentially one-on-one coaching sessions with players who are just like you. They're players. Some of them are very good. Some of them are a little bit more recreational, right? And they are all working hard to improve their skills. If you join Poker Coaching Premium right now, you can get the biggest bonus I've ever given, 240 hours of one-on-one coaching videos with students who are working hard on their games and trying to improve. And many of them have made gigantic leaps in their skill over the last 4 or 5 years. And some of them are crushing it now. I know one of the biggest winners on one of the American sites has been an Inner Circle member for a very long time. He's in there. He's doing it, working hard and improving his skills. Also, included in Poker Coaching Premium is the 30-day tournament preparation challenge. We also have a 30-day cash game challenge where each day for 30 days, I give you a specific video to watch that will help you fix a specific part of your poker strategy and make sure you're playing very, very well. And by the end of the 30 days, you'll be able to play most spots optimally. It's also going to do a lot to getting you in the habit of studying, right? Getting in the habit of studying regularly is going to go a long way to helping you play great poker because you're going to be working harder than your opponents. I mean, imagine if you study even like 20 minutes a day, right? 2 hours a week. That's 100 hours per year that you will have studied. If it's only 20 minutes a day compared to your opponents who are probably studying almost none, right? Our members are crushing it. Here's Laura Eisenberg, longtime poker coaching member, took first place in the ladies tournament recently. Good job, good work. I actually made a few YouTube videos with her that one of them came out just the other day, actually, on my YouTube channel. So check that out at youtube.com/pokercoaching. We have the 30-day cash game challenge as well that will teach you over 30 days how to play fundamentally sound poker in all the common spots and also how to take advantage of your opponent's mistakes. We have a lot of stuff at pokercoaching.com if you have not been paying attention. So anyway, for Black Friday, you can get access to Poker Coaching Premium, which is normally $99 a month, as a 3-year subscription. We are going to be here for a long time. I know a lot of people in the poker space come and go. I don't really go. I just stay here and work hard all the time. And I'm going to be here for 3 years and even longer, right? So you can get 3 years of Poker Coaching Premium for $1,399, cheaper than the price of Poker Coaching Standard normally. You get access to all this stuff, the Cash Game Masterclass, Tournament Masterclass, and a whole lot more. Here's another student who's crushing it. How many more slides do we have of students crushing it? This is Gershon Destenfeld, absolute crusher. He final tabled the main event last year. He hired me to coach him, and he donates all of his winnings to charity. So he was kind of approaching it from the point of view of, I want to try to win the bracelet. Now, when you approach it from the point of view of, I want to try to win the bracelet, you may not necessarily win as much money as possible, but you are going to take first place more than your opponents. And sometimes you're going to bust out first. And in the main event last year, he busted in 8th place. That said, I think he played both of his hands perfectly fine. He just lost 2 hands right off the bat. But he took that same approach into the shootout this year, the $1,500 shootout, where there are no payout implications on the first 2 days. If you bust everyone at your table, you move on to the next day. So all of the study we did to try to win the bracelet paid off very well. He won the shootout. He won all the chips in the tournament. It was amazing. He won three, I think 8 or 9 handed tables in a row, and he got the bracelet. And all the work we did studying how to go about playing in a winner-take-all scenario was great because that's exactly the game he was playing. He got the bracelet. We made some YouTube videos with him as well that will be coming out in the near future. So, for Poker Coaching Premium, we're giving gigantic discounts, as you see, the biggest discount here for a 3-year membership, but you can get it roughly half off if you want 1 year. Let's just read everything you're going to get here, and it's probably even more than this. You are going to get live weekly coaching webinars. Every week, we have webinars with me, the other coaches, and we go through all sorts of topics. One of my favorite coaches, Matt Affleck, has a webinar every week where he goes through and explains how to play very common spots that his students are struggling with or spots that he is struggling with. And now we have a library of all the common spots where he's going through using a GTO solver, showing how to play it from a GTO point of view and also from an exploitative point of view. And that's just one of our coaches, right? We have a ton of coaches doing this type of thing. We also have over 1,400 interactive quizzes. We add to these all the time. We have thousands of GTO preflop charts. If you're a Poker Coaching member, we actually have a Poker Coaching app that you can use to reference these charts. Not while you're in a hand, but, take a look at the charts and make sure you're playing well. Whenever I am coaching my students, I'm very often making sure that they are playing somewhat by the GTO charts, or if they are not playing by the GTO charts, they have a good reason to be adjusting from them, right? So all those are available on the website and also in your Poker Coaching app. By the way, all the stuff is available in the Poker Coaching app, so you can use it on your phone, your iPad, whatever. We also have 300 coaching webinars. It's a lot of webinars. These are 30-minute long videos to hour-long videos that were usually recorded live where we go through and explain various topics and also answer the students' questions as they discuss them live with us, right? We also have over 185 hand history reviews that I have done for these students. Students would send in hands, I would review them. We have a ton of hand history reviews available so that you can go, it's almost like playing hands, right? And getting my feedback in real time. We also have 100 plus video classes. These are 30-minute long videos on specific topics that I made. Basically, students ask me a question. If I did not have a video that answered it, I'd make a video that answers it. Simple as that. I want to make sure that all of your questions are answered. So that you have I want this to be a one-stop shop so you can come in and literally learn everything you could possibly want to know about No Limit Texas Hold'em. We also have loads and loads of pre-flop charts for various situations you may find yourself in. Like if you're at a very loose, splashy table, for example, we have exploitative pre-flop charts available as well. Plus, 65 homework webinars. Every month, I present the students with a homework question and ask them to go about figuring out how to play their entire range, pre-flop, on the flop, on the turn, and on the river, kind of like we did at the start of this webinar, right? And the students who have gone through and have done these exercises, the homework, now they know how to play, basically. I mean, they know how to play pretty close to GTO poker by structuring their ranges as we have described earlier. Remember how we were breaking our range down to premium made hands, draws, marginal made hands, and junk, like this. The students who have done the homework can do this in their head, kind of like I can, to some extent, do this in my head. And that goes a long way to helping you know how to play good, strong, fundamentally sound poker. And then you can adjust according to whatever your opponents do incorrectly. Also, if you sign up to Poker Coaching Premium today, you'll get access to the 240 hours of the Inner Circle one-on-one coaching videos for as long as you are a member. You have access to all this stuff if you're a Poker Coaching Premium member, for as long as you're a member. Also, you get exclusive access to the new Cash Game Masterclass, which you cannot buy, but if you're a Poker Coaching Premium member, there it is. Also, we have the Tournament Masterclass, so whatever game you play, tournaments or cash games, there's a giant course there for you. We also have the 30-day Tournament Preparation Challenge, the 30-day Cash Game Challenge, and access to loads and loads and loads of other courses on all sorts of topics. Here they all are again. These are just a few of them. If I went through and talked about and explained everything available in pokercoaching.com, it would take me literally forever. So anyway, check it out, pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. You can get it right now. Realize, though, that I created Poker Coaching to give you everything you could possibly need to succeed at poker and let you achieve your full potential. But if I fail to deliver on that, if you think that Poker Coaching is not worth the price, it does not help you, whatever, let me know within 30 days, and we will give you a full 100% refund. Fortunately, not many people ask for refunds, but, look, if I don't help you, I do not want or deserve your money. This is not something where, I try to sell you something and then disappear, or try to sell you something one time and don't update it. That is not how we operate. I'm consistently going back and updating the large aspects of the site, like the Cash Game Masterclass, for example. Someone asks, what's the difference between this and the old Cash Game Masterclass? The old Cash Game Masterclass was done before we had a lot of the tools and a lot of the educational structure that we have in our courses. Also, it was way smaller, right? We were not really going through any or many spots using the GTO solver. It was just more of a crash course to some extent. This is a gigantic course. It's, I think, 32 hours long, plus a bunch of hand history reviews of my hands, my students' hands, etc. One of our students actually plays a lot of 1-3 and 2-5. He's decided a few years ago to become a live cash game grinder, and he's crushing it. He's winning something like $50 an hour, and I had him write down every hand he played from a few sessions in a row, and I went through all the hands and gave him my feedback. And, to be fair, he actually played very well. There were a few spots where I thought he could play slightly different, but he plays great. And we went through a lot of his hands from 1-3 and 2-5 No Limit Hold'em, because I know a lot of you tell me those are the games that you are playing. Live poker is alive and well in Vegas. Yeah, live poker cash games are fantastic. So anyway, all this is available at pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. Get in there. Take advantage of it. I mean, this is the biggest sale we're going to have all year. So if you want to study poker, get in there and make good use of it. And look, if you know you're going to be playing poker for a few years in a row, let's just think about it from a straight logical point of view. $1,400 per year is not... Our $1,400 for 3 years of access to all of this content that we have already produced and will continue producing is a pretty good value. How many dollars is that per day? Let's think about how many dollars this is per day. Imagine you watch an hour a day, which you're not. Let's imagine you're going to watch 20 minutes a day. $1,400 divided by how many days are we looking at? 1,000 in 3 years, roughly? $1.40 a day. Look, $1.40 a day is not a lot of money. I wish I had this when I was a poker player. To be fair, I made Poker Coaching Premium to be the poker coaching site that I want. All the coaches that I hire are people I want to learn from, right? I'm not hiring the coaches to teach like basic stuff. I'm hiring the coaches because I know that they know what they're doing, and I respect their game. I respect all these players' games immensely. And I made this site to be the site that I want, right? And I've had pretty good success with that. Make the stuff that I want to consume, the stuff that I want to learn from, and it turns out everybody else really does want the exact same thing. So anyway, all this is available at pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. Anyone here from Indonesia? I'm not from Indonesia, but hey, maybe someone is. I saw 2 people were in New York City. I'm not in New York City right now. I'm in Las Vegas. I'm going to go play a $50,000 buy-in tournament today. I better wake up. That should be fun. So anyway, take advantage of the Black Friday sale. Hope you learn a lot. I really do hope you learn a lot. I mean, look, poker is a hard game. It is a big game. And if you are not studying and you're playing like 1-2 or higher, or $50 tournaments or higher, you're probably not going to have great success long term. My goal at the end of the day is to get all of you crushing something like 5-10 no limit, where you can make $100 an hour. $100 an hour is great money for the vast majority of people. Or get you to where you can win at $1,000 buy-in tournaments, where you're making 20, 30, 40, 50% ROI. So every time you go to the casino, on average you're going to make $300. $300 for 4 hours of play is a pretty good living for most people. And obviously there's going to be a lot of variance, but this is still very possible knock the table. This is still very possible in today's poker economy. The game's only getting tougher though, and if you do not make a point to study, you are going to get left behind. So don't get left behind. Take advantage of it. Pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. That's going to be it for today. I have to go get ready to play the tournament. Good luck. Good luck in your games. Have fun. And thank you for being here. I appreciate all of you working hard, studying, and pushing me to continue giving you all of this excellent educational poker content. Take advantage of it at pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. Good luck in your games. Have fun. And I'll talk to you next time.